Thank you all for showing up. I know there are a lot of ideas being shared right now, so thank you and to coming and listening to our session. So my name is Darnell Strom. I am an agent at a talent agency in Los Angeles called the Creative Artists Agency, and we're one of the leading entertainment agencies. And one of my areas of focus is in the CA Foundation, which is working with our talent clients as well as our producers, writers, directors, helping them figure out ways to connect with the issues that they care about. So when working with Tricia and Kitty on putting together a panel and a conversation on the importance of how stories can help change society, we were able to build out a great panel, and I want to have you guys join me in welcoming Neil Baer, TV producer, as well as Brian Knappenberger, who is a documentary filmmaker as well as a producer. So thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My first question, I'm going to start with you, Neil. You have a very unique background from your typical TV showrunner. You're a medical doctor, but you've also kind of pioneered introducing issues of health and policy into the stories that you've been a part of, and you've worked on shows like ER, Law & Order SVU, and now Under the Dome. Take us through your path from medical doctor to TV showrunner and the work that you've done over the last few years.
Thanks. It's great to be here in Aspen. I'm from Denver, so I love being back in Colorado. I grew up in Denver, and I had the good fortune of being in an elementary school class with John Wells when we were 9 years old, and so it paid off. People ask me, how do you get into Hollywood? And usually the answer is you have to write spec scripts, but I was friends with John. So he hired me on China Beach, and then I left because I thought, I don't know if this was for me, and I went to Harvard Medical School, and in my fourth year, I was sent by John again, Michael Crichton's script for ER that Michael wrote in 1969, and Steven Spielberg owned it. It literally was in a trunk, dormant, for 25 years. And in '94, someone found it and said, Steven, what do you think? And he said, I think it could be a TV show. So they asked me to come and share my life, and I spilled it out. So what happened to Noah Wyle and George Clooney particularly is what really happened to me.
Wow.
In fact, I said to George once on the first year of the show, he came to me with a script and he said, Neil, Doug Ross would not say this. And I said, really, George, how do you know? And he said, well, I'm Doug Ross. And I said, well, I'm Doug Ross here and here, maybe not here. So, so it became a really collaborative experience. It was a real turning point for me because I realized that those actors are conduits for my passions. And so I am Olivia Benson. Mariska Hargitay does not make up what she said for the 11 years I ran the show. It came from my head and my heart and my passion for storytelling and for public health and to bring it to the audience. So I was really lucky that what started to be a 2-month where I was recruited to tell all the stories for ER that we ended up doing became 7 years, and I did my residency and internship over 7 years during ER and SVU, and I'd hide in the linen closet and give notes, and I didn't know what was my real life, what was my fictional life, and then now Under the Dome, which really this year it premiered on Monday, is about kind of being stewards of our environment. So for me, what's really important is, as a storyteller, is how to bridge the gap between inspiration and action. And I really, truly believe that storytelling is the force in our lives. We engage with each other through our stories. We keep track of our past with our stories, and we dream about the future with our stories. And without stories, or the ability to tell them, like for instance someone with Alzheimer's, they are lost to us. So storytelling, we are wired to tell stories. We even know that from research, from Paul Slovik's research. That's why Nick Kristof and I tell stories about individuals, because you, the audience, if I told you, we showed a film last week about kids with rheumatic heart disease. There are 13 million children in Africa with rheumatic heart disease. But that number doesn't resonate. We don't have brains unless we're real kind of interesting mathematicians or physicists. We don't think in those terms. We think in story terms. So that film is about one little girl's journey from Rwanda to Sudan to get a heart valve replacement, and it captivates you. So if I can captivate you with a story and inspire you, then maybe I can help you find the action that you can take, or maybe your mind might be changed. And we'll talk more about that, about how drama can do that. But that's really the basic drive that I have in the work that I do, is how can I engage you and inspire you and then leave it to you to find ways, and particularly with new media and transmedia, how can I give you the tools now to take action when you are inspired by something you see, a show, a drama, or a documentary. So that's the path that I've been taking over all these years, and being a doctor really helps because there's no profession that allows you to invade the secrets of others as much as being a doctor. And so I have been so fortunate with the children I've treated, because I'm a pediatrician, and their parents, to really hear their stories and to have them open their hearts to me. And I certainly draw on those stories for the stories that I've told on ER and SVU and on Under the Dome.
Thank you, Neil. Brian, so you've kind of become the documentary storyteller of the so-called hacktivist movement.
Right.
You've
not necessarily intentionally, but
right.
yes.
And you've done 2 films on the topic. First, We Are Legion, which is the story of the hacktivists, and then now, and by the way, congratulations, your new film, Internet's Own Boy, the story of Aaron Swartz, just came out on Friday. So tell us, how you got into this issue. How did you stumble on the story of hacktivism, and what compelled you to tell these stories?
Yeah, I mean, I've been making documentary films now for about 15 years. I worked for Frontline for a little while, PBS Frontline. I've done a fair amount of work for PBS. I worked for National Geographic and Discovery and Bloomberg Television. So I've been sort of in the documentary field for quite a while, and I often, am looking at this idea of how to get something that's, in the documentary world, sometimes you call it the eating your vegetables thing, the really important message that you're trying to get out. How to communicate that most effectively, and there's no question that we are storytelling creatures, this is how it's not the only way we communicate, but it is certainly the most powerful and the most emotional. So I've been looking, always looking for that sort of thing. When it comes to hackers and hacktivism, I just feel like we're in an interesting place right now where, on the one hand, we live these massively networked lives in which all of our lives now have an online component to it. And that online landscape is insecure, and it's challenging lots of things that, on the other hand, you might say are quote unquote sort of traditional values, things like freedom of speech, the right not to be searched without due process from our government, constitutional rights, human rights, all this stuff. We are in a period now where those two tectonic plates are shifting and grinding against each other. And right where that tension is where there's the most tension, is the world. Hackers reside in that world. That's where these things are being decided. It's not a comfortable place to be. My current film about Aaron Swartz is tragic. And he was ahead of, I think, the rest of us, and I don't think that's a comfortable place to be. But it's where the big issues of our time are being decided, I think, right now, and defined. And so I actually don't think I've often thought, like, I don't really make films about hackers. I just make films about people. Right. I long ago promised myself I would never do have a shot with the kind of matrixy, ones and zeros projected on someone's face as the kind of maniacal hacker, sweaty in the basement. Like, I just don't see it that way. I think we all live online now. The freedom of speech, the Fourth Amendment, search, legal searches of our data. These are the deals. This is the issues that we're all dealing with now.
I think many people feel like documentary film storytelling at this point has become perhaps the last frontier of true long-form investigative journalism. What were you seeing in the mainstream media about the Aaron Swartz story? What were you seeing and what weren't you seeing that compelled you to want to dive deeper into the topic and actually make a film truly telling his story?
Well, what I was seeing in the mainstream media, and there was a lot written about Aaron right after his death. There was this huge wave of anger and frustration and sort of sympathy about this case. One of the reasons why I wanted to explore why this resonated so much with people. But what I saw was glimpses, small, tiny little pieces of the story. Some of it was very good. I mean, some of it was great writing, in New Yorker and Rolling Stone and everybody. But these were small glimpses, and it wasn't necessarily a story. It was kind of outrage, really, or it was sort of one piece of the story that seemed wrong. And I do think that storytelling is it's what brings us in emotionally to to something. And when we're in that kind of storytelling space, it's a safe place to sort of understand understand these issues in a way that doesn't feel off-putting. So I thought that, and on the point of investigative journalism, I do think that investigative journalism is broken right now. I think if you were to rewind the clock 40 years, you'd probably have in this country maybe 50 companies that had a nationwide reach. Now that's been consolidated down to about 4 or 5, and that's a problem. Some of the best things you can say about a lot of stories are that they trade access to power and celebrity for basically softball interpretations. So there does need to be an independent sort of form that is kind of challenging.
Neil, so back to you. A lot of the topics that you address in your TV shows are related to environment or health. One of the questions posed in the description of this panel is, what are some of the resources that exist for content creators for them to be able to find accurate information so they can tell the stories in the right way? And I know you have an institute at UCLA. Tell us a bit about how you guys are serving as that resource, and tell us too about some of the research that you guys have done and what's come out of that.
Well, as Brian is saying, stories are what compel us. And we know that we're driven by stories from the research that just have 1 or 2 protagonists. Even Dickens, that has, a massive number of characters, there is that one protagonist, Pip. And so we just as human beings relate to those people, and that's why we love stories, that's why we love movies. And when I did SVU, I would contend it was the most political show on television. I mean, we did shows on teen access to abortion, gun control issues, but we were able to do it in a way that was not pedantic or educational or entertainment. I don't like to talk about edutainment, I hate that word. I just talk about how can I tell a really good story. And what's compelling to me about drama and documentary is that we have these strands. So when I did a show some years ago about euthanasia with a child who had Tay-Sachs, no chance of recovery, terrible suffering, will die, and a mother who euthanized that child, I had all the strands through my characters. It's like a three-dimensional matrix of all the points of view. It's God's will. I don't want my child to suffer. I would do the same thing. I would try to find people who are doing research. I would never give up hope. All the things that go in through our heads, and if we're contending with these issues, we can play through drama, through our different characters, so that we're not telling people what to think. We're showing the messy life struggles that go on, and that's why I think dramas and documentaries do the same thing, are so compelling. So I think it's really important to be accurate, because we know from research that's been done out of Tom Del Banco at Harvard that people get their health information particularly from the internet, and it used to be more from TV, now from the internet. So when I was doing ER, I wanted to know, is that really true? Am I having an effect? Because I'm a physician, I want to have an impact. I don't just want to put stories out there. So we did the first study of its kind, an experimental study actually, where Juliana Margulies took care of a girl with human papillomavirus, and she had cervical cancer. So before the show aired, we did a survey with Kaiser Family Foundation, Princeton Survey Research, a large random sample of viewers, and found out that only 9% knew in 2000 that HPV caused cervical cancer. This was before Gardasil, the vaccine, came out. The show aired, that was the treatment. In the past, there were retrospective studies done that said, do you remember seeing such and such? But those studies obviously have bias in them, because you're telling people to remember something that you want them to remember. We gave them the treatment, and then we resurveyed them a week later, and we found that 30% knew that HPV caused cervical cancer. It came from the show. And the show, that story only was about 7 minutes of the whole show. So people learn from the show, and so we published that in Health Affairs, and it made me worry about being as accurate as possible, which is why I worked with the CDC in the early years of ER, and I said, give me some information to help me. And I worked with Jay Winston, who's here now, who did the designated driver stuff too, because we knew that if we put those stories out there, people would listen and they would think they're real, because we went to so much trouble to make it look real. And that's a fight I have in Hollywood with a very popular soapy drama, that's not always accurate, a medical drama. And I say, why don't you just use paper backdrops and, not make it look real? You want it to look real, so you have the responsibility to your audience. And we know that half our audience looks things up at some point based on what we tell them on our show. So we want to be accurate about HIV and type 2 diabetes and hypertension and the problems that we're dealing with health-wise in this country and around the world. And so we started an organization at USC through funding by Norman Lear called Hollywood Health and Society, where we give writers accurate information, and it's been really powerful. And I'll tell you one very quick anecdote, which is I brought Atul Gawande to ER in the last year, and he wrote a book called The Checklist Manifesto about 7 things you can do, I think it is, as a surgeon to reduce the mortality and morbidity rate in surgery by 47%. And it's like, introduce yourselves. Make sure antibiotics are on board before you cut. Make sure you have everything that you might need in case there's an unforeseen event, but you've had a lot of practice as a surgeon, so you know to have certain things. So Eric LaSalle goes in and he's fighting with the surgeon who's operating on Noah Wiley for a kidney transplant, telling him what the checklist is, because Atul went to ER, told the writers what it was. They incorporated it into the show. It worked dramatically. Noah's character has an unforeseen event. The kidney has a clot. They have to use reperfusion fluid. The surgeon didn't ask for it, but the checklist tells you to do it, and the kidney was saved. The next day, across the world, doctors were forced to watch that show. France asked for it. They changed their policy. France makes every surgeon do the checklist. Surgeons were forced to do it. Atul said he writes for the New Yorker, he gives speeches, he's at Harvard as a surgeon, he's publishing research. Nothing had the impact that one ER episode did in changing people's minds. They see it, it looks real. So that's why we try to do that. So now at UCLA with my new center, the Global Media Center for Social Impact, we look at not just giving people accurate information, because that's helpful, but we want to talk about now what I'm really passionate about, which is the social determinants of health. You know, I'm not that interested in what goes on in the clinic, because I was recently at Harvard and the medical students were saying to me, how do I get my patients to take their insulin? How do I get my patients to take their antihypertensives? In Los Angeles, 1 in 9 adults has type 2 diabetes. It will bankrupt us if we don't do something. 1 in 9. So I'm interested in the social determinants of health. Violence, social justice, economic justice, immigration, LGBT issues, environmental exposures. How do those parts of our lives affect our health in such a way that it determines our health early on? And how can we address those things? So our center now goes to writers and says, let's talk about kids who stay up all night because their parents are working 3 jobs, there's violence outside their homes. How does that affect their health? How does that affect their cortisol in their body? How does that change their stress levels? How do we get writers to start writing about that? And that's easy to do in any kind of show, a comedy or a drama. And we start to then understand that it's not just when you go to the clinic or your doctor's office or the hospital that you have to change the way that you live. It's early on. And so that's what we're trying to do with our new center, and use transmedia, all the social media ways that we can connect our audience. Now, if you see on my show something about type 2 diabetes, very soon you'll be able to click and go to a link, and we can talk to you about it. We can hook you up with exercise. We can hook you up with diets. We can hook you up with recipes. We can do all sorts of things that really do bridge the gap between inspiration, because you're interested, and you taking action.
That sounds like education, like you're educating people. And I know you hate to say that you are. I read a Fast Company interview where you say you don't like to use education. You said it here earlier that you don't like to say you're educating, but it sounds like you are. And why are you adverse to saying that you're providing education?
I do want to say that I certainly educate, but educate is like sort of unidirectional. That's the old way of thinking of things. I think about it as more a process. So I'm giving you a story, and then you make decisions yourself. But I'm not here to say, you better do this. And for example, we work with Tostan, Molly Melching. She works with women in Senegal, Ethiopia, and Somalia to deal with female genital cutting. If the UN or various NGOs go into these communities and say, you shouldn't do that, it's bad, that's educating them. Guess what? It doesn't work. But if we give those women tools, which we did do, to teach them how to tell their own stories through film or photography, then they start talking to each other, and they share their stories, and they educate each other. So we're really the springboard. We're really the fount. We're just throwing out the ideas. So I just don't want to be pedantic. I just want to like throw it out there. I don't care if I don't really, well, I do care, but what you believe, but I want you to come to your own decision. And I know that if I tell you how I feel about these really raucous, tumultuous social issues, you're going to get turned off. But if I show you a struggle over euthanasia or abortion or gun control or obesity and all of the factors that are in it, then it's up to you, and you won't maybe like be turned off and say, hey, who's he to tell me what to do? I'm watching Mariska Hargitay and Chris Maloney and Richard Belzer and Judd Hirsch, who played the doctor, and Elizabeth Mitchell, who played the mother, who was so, just heartbroken about what to do about her child. And then you bring your own story to it, and you say, well, what would I do if that were my child? And maybe I understand why a parent might euthanize their child. And then we step away from that old sort of unidirectional, I'll tell you what's good for you, or as you said, you eat your vegetables.
What's interesting to me is why storytelling is so effective. And I think it's because there's an emotional element to it, right? You can easily imagine the way it's not the only way we communicate. We have debates, right? We argue about things, and this is great. We talk about political issues, and we talk about things that are important, and and it's one of the reasons we're here at the Aspen Ideas Fest, to discuss ideas and to have debates, and I consider one of the great joys in life, arguing with people who disagree with me, but. Mostly that kind of communication is about hardening the positions and opinions that we already have. There's something about that way of communicating that forces us to reinforce our own opinions, to look for evidence that supports our opinions, or studies or whatever, or other people that agree with us, so that we can do battle. And there's this kind of jockeying for opinion. But storytelling, you let down your guard. Right? I mean, debating is it reminds me of that George Bernard Shaw quote. The most dangerous thing about communication is the illusion that it has taken place. A lot of times we come away from debates more entrenched in our own positions, but storytelling lets us take down our guard. We can sort of safely project ourselves onto characters who are wrestling with moral issues in ways that we can we can try it on for size. We can see decisions that they're making, and we can wonder, well, what would we have done in that position? And because of that, it enlarges our perspective.
So this is a question for both of you. I want you to take me through the process when you're creating a story, especially a story that has the possibility for major social impact. As you're creating the story, are you thinking about the social impact outcomes on the back end? Are you coordinating with other organizations so that once you've put that information out there, your viewers have the ability to go from the passive experience of viewing to the active experience of being involved? How much of your process is storytelling versus activism?
Yeah, I mean, I am, I think to me that stuff kind of happens naturally. As you're exploring a story, as you're investigating a story, as you're uncovering what it is, or you're finding a story that from which the greater sort of truth emerges. You bump up against people that are passionate about that stuff. So you end up befriending them. You end up understanding more about their organizations, and then as is the case with the Internet's own boy, it becomes a tool for them too. I mean, Larry Lessig, his story, Aaron's story inspired him. Aaron himself inspired him to take this turn in his life, and what he's now on, which is trying to end money in politics. Some of Aaron's the groups that he co-founded, like Demand Progress, are still carrying on the fight. So it becomes a tool for that, and then you can easily see how you can kind of build from there and sort of educate people. If they want more of the kind of hard information, you can kind of point them in a direction. But it comes if there is an emotional connection, it's just so obviously more effective.
So I love what Brian said. It's about the intellect and the heart. So we're really lucky because when we tell stories either in a drama or in documentaries, we lasso both. We give you the facts. That's why I said it's important. But we give you the heart, and your heart, identifies, and that's why these stories can be templates that we can use for our own lives. And they, I do think, shift opinions. We could talk about where things have changed, because I think Hollywood has been involved and told profound stories, or where documentaries have done the same. So for an example from what Darnell just asked, I was at an event, Mariska Hargitay, one of your clients, was so moved by the letters she was getting on SVU that she decided to start a foundation called Joyful Heart Foundation for women who'd been sexually abused or physically abused, and had secrets, and giving them a safe place to talk with therapists. So I was at an event, and a woman told her story about not being able to leave her home because her rape kit was never tested. So I heard this story. I wrote it down on a cocktail napkin. I went to her. I said, "Tell me more about your story." And she said, "I went through a 7-hour exam, excruciating. They never opened my kit. This guy is still out there." And we know statistically that these guys have most often done it before, and very often their DNA is in the system. So there's a lack of political will, lack of care, whatever. So I made that into an episode of SVU. And I do think about, I guess I'm like a story activist. So I do think about how it's not enough for me. Maybe it's because I'm a physician too, and I've been out there and I see sort of what people's lives are like when they are sexually abused and they go through this kind of assessment, or they're victims of domestic violence. 1 of 3 women in an ER is a victim of domestic violence. So I think it's incumbent on me to share that with the audience. And so when I developed that story, I also worked with partners and opinion leaders. So what I did is I got Nick Kristof and Arianna Huffington and Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, and I made a 30-second bubble tweet where I just took pieces from that episode where Mariska is saying 5,000 untested kits in Birmingham, 12,000 untested kits in Detroit. If only her kit had been tested, this guy would have been caught, and he wouldn't have done this to other women. So that was 30 seconds. And then I bit.ly'd it, and I sent it to Nick, and Nick tweeted it to his over 1 million followers, as did all the others. And pretty soon, it had this viral dynamism that was just unbelievable. And now with Twitter, we can embed links as well. So I could, Human Rights Watch, a big domestic issue is opening the backlog of rape kits. So we could then link people to Human Rights Watch if they were emotionally moved by the show. And I'm not going to emotionally move everybody on every topic, I know that, but those snowballs will hit you at some point. It might be opening the backlog of rape kits, it might be on another topic, but it stings, and you're gonna go. So we had a lot of people go to the link, and they found out how they could go to their chief of police, how they could go to their city council members. We gave them a kit so that they could do it. And we opened the backlog of rape kits in Los Angeles, and it's happening. And then Congress got involved, and Mariska testified, and it's now happening. So we're stopping this from occurring. So yes, I often think about how to do that. I think about it on Under the Dome, where next week there's pestilence, the next week there's acid rain, there's dust storms coming, and we're going to be able to link through transmedia. We have the first transmedia producer now at CBS who's on our show to give people ways to find out more. You know, we have a lot of stuff about monarch butterflies on our show, and they're in danger, and so you can go and find out more about monarch butterflies. So the point is that these stepping stones of stories are just so powerful. And I did think about that. I worked with Participant. And every week when I had a topic, typically every week there was some social justice issue on SVU, then I would send it to Take Part, and then they could build some links to connect people who are interested. So I think that's really, the future is we will give you ways to take, people are so busy. It's like we have to give them action steps. And sometimes the action steps can just be so simple, like here's a letter you can write to your congressperson, or it can be here's a kit that you can use, and here's how you can become an advocate, and you can change things in your town, and you can make them open the rape kits if that's what you want to do. And certainly the beginning is the inspiration from the story.
So Neil, you mentioned Participant Media. So Participant, I'm not sure if all of you know, but Participant is funded by Jeff Skoll. It is one of the first highly capitalized, film and TV production companies that's making content that has a dual bottom line. So one, yes, they want to make money, but the other piece is that they want to have social impact. And do you see that trend of these type of production companies obviously having Jeff's money makes it a lot easier to make the material. But do you see more high net worth individuals perhaps wanting to do what Jeff has done, funding production companies like this, using it as a way to make social impact because there are all these examples of how storytelling can move the needle on issues they might care about?
Well, certainly Bill Gates is doing it. Go ahead.
There's some examples of philanthropy that are great. I don't see, in a broader sense, I don't see very many companies really working for that. We were lucky enough in our film to have had a lot of kind of offers for the film, sort of traditional offers for the film, and
Participant's your partner on the
and
film.
so we ended up going with Participant just because they understood this element. Obviously, I'm making a film about an advocate. There's lots of these kinds of really critical kind of issues that we believe in that sort of come naturally out of the film that need kind of social action campaigns. So that part was really, really important. I mean, we got almost offers from anybody. I don't think there was that many people that could even get their head around that as a concept or as a purpose for a story.
What responsibility or role, if any, do you think TV networks and studios have to supporting kind of entertaining social issue content? So things that are still appealing to mass audiences. Is there a responsibility from their side to give it more support? Do you have any opinions on that?
Well, I think that there is, but I think that it's funny, even the question, like, to make it more appealing, as though this stuff is like boring and terrible, and like it's the stuff we don't want, this the eat your vegetables stuff.
Right.
I don't think that those things can be the same thing. Yeah. I mean, obviously, Neil's work is like an example. I hope mine is, but there has to be an awareness of actual storytelling. I really do think that if you're telling a sequence of events, and there's an emotional connection there, that the air around it becomes infused with this larger meaning and context. I mean, storytelling goes back our whole history, and it stays. And the important stories stay with us because they teach us stuff. There is the eat your vegetables part in that too. So that's I think I think that just an understanding. Filmmakers and documentary filmmakers, I think about this a lot because you go into an issue thinking, I want to make a film about this, money in politics, or the drug war, or whatever, and so there's a temptation to just go and say, let's interview all the experts and get a definitive account of this, and that's not something that's it's easy to put people off that way because you're again entrenching them in these kind of battle of opinions. Storytelling, you let down your guard, you understand the story, and you are allowed the space to make up your own mind in that.
Neil, has there ever been a storyline that you wanted to put in the show where the network's like, you're crazy, what are you doing? Any pushback?
Never. Only with Tylenol, when we had a girl in ER take Tylenol, which is a very bad drug for you if you overdose on it. It's a great drug if you take it correctly, and it seems benign, but it kills your liver if you overdose. And so it was a girl who had been, there was an incest issue, a suicide attempt, and Tylenol, and they said, well, boy, it's three big issues. You can do the first two, but you have to say acetaminophen. So that was the only time, and Tony Edwards refused to, and they bleeped him. But that was the only time. But I do think, there's all this talk about it's the golden age of television again, and I kind of think it's not. I mean, I might be like sort of become a pariah for saying that.
I just told someone yesterday it's the golden age of television.
Yeah, I think it's not. I think it's actually, that was 15.
Tell me why I'm wrong.
That was 15 years ago. I couldn't tell stories about teen access to abortion or gun control or well, I am doing a euthanasia strike, can't believe it, under the dome. But it's very tough to do highly controversial stories now. And I think it's the political climate, there's fear, the pie has been divided into so many little pieces. When I did ER, we had 40 million viewers. We did the first and only HIV positive lead character on television. There's been none since. Gloria Rubin's character, she was here last week and we were speaking. Why is that? Why, 50,000 people are infected every year. I don't think anybody would allow it. I mean, it's just not done now. It's a more conservative time in television, I think. And so, yeah, we have these breakthrough shows, but do we really have shows on now that are really, they're parables, certainly like Walking Dead and Breaking Bad, but do we have shows that are really like in the days of ER, NYPD Blue or Hill Street Blues, that really take on like racism, social class issues? Yeah, we have drug abuse, and we have like the age of the anti-hero hero, or Nurse Jackie or The Shield, and we could go on, like these kind of like asshole characters who, you know, you kind of love, and that's kind of popular. But do we really have shows, can you think of shows now that really grapple with the tough issues of our times? Maybe Homeland and that one area. But, you know, have you seen a show that talks about abortion? Yet on Monday, we had a big Supreme Court ruling. There seems to me, for me at least, a dissonance between what's going on in our world and what's going on television.
I was just going to jump in. I would challenge that. I think network television has gotten way more conservative, and I feel like cable TV, you know, and definitely the pay channels like Showtime and HBO have taken way bigger risks than they would have taken 10 or 15 years ago. But a lot of people are looking for that more risque content on those channels, and I feel like network TV has become more family focused because the folks who want that more extreme content don't want to watch an NBC show or a CBS show because they know it's only going to go so far.
Yeah, I'm not so sure I agree with you. It's like, where's abortion, gun control, racism?
Well, a lot of this is on the internet.
It's on the internet, it's in documentaries,
like,
but it's not on HBO or Showtime. It's like it's not on Masters of Sex. It's
Netflix,
not on.
I mean,
we'll
Orange is
see.
the New Black. You see a lot of those
Orange
issues.
is the
House
New
of
Black.
Cards
Yes.
addresses it.
So on those sort of now outliers, we'll see. But I'm talking about on the broadcast network.
Right.
But we saw it 15 years ago all the time on network television.
Right. Yeah, but there's certainly a hunger for this from audiences. There's no question in my mind. I mean, you know, people are hungry for these kind of stories. They discuss this stuff online. There's big communities. This is a community that's not being tapped into by these people. So there's not necessarily. It may be more a fault of the model than it is a desire for people to see interesting and engaging stories.
So we're going to do two quick questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. This question is for Neil. So, you know, if you look at the top 10 rated TV shows over the last 30 years, there's always been a medical drama in the top 10. People like medical procedural shows. So, you know, it's a great opportunity for you, being a doctor, to be putting in these accurate storylines. But are there ever any issues outside of medicine that appeal to you that you wish that you could, you know, introduce to your shows that aren't medical related at all?
Well, that's why I took on Under the Dome, because I love Stephen King and Steven Spielberg, to work with him again. And my show's about fascism. So, you know, it's Dean Norris's character is a fascist. He said he's going to make the trains run on time. That's what it's about. We never used the F word last year, but he is running wild and trying to control everybody, and it's a show about, can democracy exist when resources are dwindling? And that's a question. I keep saying, gosh, I should have paid more attention at Colorado College to my political theory course, because we're just like, it's always about like, was that Rousseau? Was that Hume? So absolutely, you know, we can tell, and we can still do that on the network, and I'm really grateful to them that I can do a show about fascism, but I don't say it, but maybe that's okay to do this parable. So,
but that's what storytelling is.
Exactly.
That's always been storytelling.
Exactly.
People in fascist regimes have always turned to storytelling as a way of kind of making a point, but skirting it a little.
And you
bit.
can make it now with, you know, like the show I'm doing, because we are facing dwindling resources. So who's going to make the decisions for us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then my last question before we open it up, you know, years ago we saw books like Uncle Tom's Cabin that kind of helped shape people's hearts and minds on the issue of slavery, and books were the kind of platform back then that did it. These days, books not as much, but it seems to be television and film. For both of you, why TV for your platform, Neil? Why film for your platform, Brian? I know you've done some TV as well. You know, why didn't you just write a book on Aaron Swartz's story? Why did you feel like film was the best platform for it?
Emotional connection. I mean, you're talking to the people. I made this film relatively quickly. It was a year. We premiered at Sundance about a year within a 1-week anniversary of his death, and so I was talking to people who knew him very close to the time when they'd lost somebody that they loved very deeply. So You see and feel that emotion. It's evocative. It allows you. The story generally allows me to get into all these other issues that I think are these big picture issues. This compelling story is a launching point for this other stuff. But I think that the medium it's a new medium. It's evolved since then, but it's the same thing. It's the same instinct, I think, as an Uncle Tom's Cabin, or it's the same as if you'd write a book. It's just a new form now that's more prevalent and has I wouldn't say more. It's more evocative. I'm a avid reader, but it has different tools to use that can reach different audiences.
Yeah.
Well, I love TV because, it is a huge audience, and we had 10 million viewers on Monday night. So it's like, wow. I mean, how could I reach that through, journalism or through a book? It's even hard to reach people to get people to, there are no bookstores anymore. So we have to find new venues for telling our stories, and they certainly exist in transmedia and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest. And how do we use mobile phones? And so I'm interested in YouTube, documentaries. Everybody has a camera, crowdsourced films, all kinds of things that are sort of opening up and blossoming for us in ways to tell stories, to reach people, to reach their hearts. For me, it's always been, because underlying it is, my, passion for social justice, for fairness. And so I think that the way to do that is through stories that depict our lives. And so TV is just one venue, and now we have all these others, and I think that because we have all these other venues now, everybody can be a storyteller. They may not be, as brilliant a storyteller as Brian is in doing the documentary, but they can still be involved in ways that they couldn't before, and it's multi-directional, and they can talk to Brian. I'm sure they talk to you on Twitter or on Facebook, and they say what they think. And this is a really powerful way to be engaged in a way we never were before. When I was on ER, I just threw it out there and hoped you would catch it. Now I go on Twitter and people ask me questions, and it's an engaging, new world. So I'm excited about it.
It is exciting about the internet. That direct connection that you have with your audience is something new.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to open up to the audience. Before you ask your question, wait for someone with a microphone to come and see you. So raise your hand. See, this woman right there. Yep. Microphone right to your left. There you go. Stand up, please.
Good morning. Thank you for all that you've shared. I have a question around telling the story of mental health. I think it's certainly something that is impacting a lot of our communities in different ways. And I wonder, what is your idea around how we can do that more effectively?
So we did many stories on mental health on ER, and the one that was the most powerful was when a young man with schizophrenia killed Kelly Martin's character. And NAMI got involved, and they said, most people with schizophrenia are not violent. And that really gave me pause, because what we do on TV is often conflict and dramatic. And so we end up often depicting mental health issues in ways that are not real in terms of how they affect the multitudes of people. And also, depression is very hard to depict on television because it's boring. When someone's depressed, they're like depressed. So, and we've tried. So these organizations like NAMI, for instance, particularly, have been very helpful in working with us to be more compassionate and not just, show people in ways that, might be easy for us. And then we try to, we work with them, and we bring in people to tell their stories. So, we get into issues like, what if someone, refuses to take their antipsychotic medication and does something, and then should they be forced to take it so they could go on trial? That's an episode of SVU we did. So, or, what about young people who, neuroscience tells us that cognitively they are not fully aware of their actions till they're about 25 and can really see the consequences. But our legal system is way behind. So how do we tell that story? So we just try to keep, that's what our centers try to do, is just stay on top of the research and bring experts out to tell their stories, and people themselves. We have what's called a story tour. And we take our writers through LA to places they've never been, like the city of Vernon and City of Commerce, and they see rendering plants right next to where people are living, and they see where the cancer rates are. And we bring on community members, or we do a mental health tour of what's available in Los Angeles, and we hear people who are suffering, sometimes profoundly, from mental health disorders, and to tell their stories. So that on these story tours, they share their stories, and that ignites the writers to tell their stories, to tell these stories on television. So it's about trying to be more accurate, more compassionate. We can be more compassionate, as Brian is saying, by showing these stories and connecting with people emotionally. So we have to even help our writers do that too, I think.
Sir, right here. There's a microphone coming right over there.
Thank you. My name is Robert Potter. You asked the question, why video versus writing a book? Well, we're sitting here. If we had been outside this room listening to Neil, we would not have the same understanding without seeing his tell the story with his hands and his gestures. He put a third dimension on it, and his hands were as active as his voice was.
Right?
That's true.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could have shown clips,
It
but
is
we
a,
decided not to, and then you really would have been taken with us.
It is an aspect of direct eye contact, understanding these kind of social sort of human cues that body language and things, inflection of voice, that brings a level to it that's very, very powerful.
Makes you wonder about online learning. Like maybe it's good for computer science, taking that course at Stanford. Is it really good for a philosophy course? We'll see.
I also think you see like a growth in nonprofit organizations too, trying to find a compelling piece of video to tell their story.
Yeah, actually, Participant is. I've been helping them with a study about this. So a lot of times you make these kind of 3 to 4 or 5 minute pieces that for a cause, and so they've been analyzing a bunch of these things, a bunch of examples of these things that worked really well, things that they thought were great but didn't work so well. And I did a piece on the NSA that got like 1 million views in a couple of hours. I mean, it was crazy. It had a big name. I think it helped that it had some big name, John Cusack and Oliver Stone and stuff. But there is a real effort. I hope we're going to publish this soon. But it's a real effort to kind of look at what are the things that kind of make for something that resonates with people and goes viral, as opposed to
Absolutely.
something
And to
people
give them
have
an
so-
action step,
Right.
which is really, we have a new platform that's going to come out in about 6 months that's going to go with a new film called Little Boy. It's called actionlab.org. And we feel that if you see Brian's documentary or you see this drama, that you'll be inspired, we hope, and want to. Or I just did a documentary called If You Build It about kids in the poorest county in North Carolina who build a farmer's market to save their community. So we hope if you see it, you're inspired to if you're inspired to do a farmer's market, we'll give you organizations, leaders, and blueprints on how to do it. Or if you want to do something else in your community, we give you a gamified approach to figure out what it is you want to do. But it, again, is that story that launches you.
Questions? Yes, ma'am, in the back right there. Yeah, you, with your hand up. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, oh, okay. Actually, sure, wait 1 second for a microphone. It's come to you, and if you could stand, that'd be great.
Mary Wallace, I'd like to know your opinion about Years of Living Dangerously, the Showtime series that's trying to inform people about climate change and other environmental issues, and then also what you all think would be the best kinds of ways of moving the needle on these environmental issues.
I haven't seen that show. Maybe I haven't seen that series, so I can't speak to it. The one interesting example, I think, again mentioning a participant film, Inconvenient Truth. If you look at that film, it has a lot. I mean, it's deep with information. It's got a lot of information, right? It's a lot, and it's a bleak and authentic sort of picture of what's going on in our world and in our environment on this critical issue. But it also has Al Gore in it, and this is maybe the first time you saw him after this election, the election of 2000. And so you're interested in his story, and it tells you his story, and you learn about where he came from, and you realize that you didn't know his story, so you're kind of brought into that as a part of it. I think that documentary filmmakers, climate change is clearly one of the most important issues facing our species. And so documentary filmmakers need to find these kind of interesting storytelling ways to let people, again, let their guard down a little bit and start to understand the hard facts. There is an element to filmmaking too that I think that if you're genuine and honest about what is actually happening, if you're bluntly kind of frank about it, and show what the facts are, I think audiences are grateful for that, even if it's bad news. And so there's a way of telling stories that sometimes that gloss over things that don't feel real. But if you can find a story that resonates with people, that feels right, that rings true, and touches these big issues, I mean, I think that's how you start a discussion.
I haven't seen the series either, but I was talking to the senator from Colorado, Mark Udall, about this issue, about, as Brian just raised, the bleakness of it. Because if you read this brilliant work by Bill McKibben, it's bleak. And so, we have to have some hope, I think, and that's where stories come in. So if, as Brian is saying, we can help a viewer locate their own story. If we can, through a plethora of different pieces, you'll find your own story, we hope. It could be, because you're living on a coast and you don't have your coast anymore, whatever it is. If we can help people locate their own story and then give them these action steps, because I think it feels bleak sometimes, where it feels that there's, what can I do? I'm only one person. So that's why we've created Action Lab. That's why we do action steps. That's why participant does take part, because we want to give you ways to take action. And you know that when you change your behavior, you sometimes feel better, but you have to know how, you have to know something. You have to have the facts first in order to change your behavior. Changing your behavior is really tough. But if you have some support along the way, sometimes if it's through therapy, or if it's through a group, or if it's through storytelling, or whatever it is, and if it's in global climate change, it might be through groups, it might be through like-minded people. That's where the internet comes in, and we can give you steps you can take so that you can feel more a part of things and not sort of this anomie of, I don't know, it's too big a problem. That's where data is kind of harmful. It's too big a problem. It's like, we have all the data we possibly need about any health issue, any climate issue, almost anything. And that's what's difficult, because we often go with the data first. And I really contend data don't move us. If they did, we'd be doing a lot more. It's those individual stories of that little girl seeking a heart valve that move us, and we say, how is it possible? And we ask the how and the why. How is it possible throughout Africa that rheumatic heart disease that does not strike children in the United States is still occurring to 13 million kids? Why can't we get penicillin, one of the cheapest drugs around, everywhere if we can get Coca-Cola everywhere? What are we doing wrong? So then we've seen that story, we start asking questions, then we use the data and say, okay, where are these kids? How do we do it? How do we think about it? And then we get involved and we can take action.
I agree with that. Part of this study that I just mentioned with participant, I mean, one of the clear things is that if people find a direct relevance to them, they're way more likely to take action. So if there's an emotional connection, if they feel like whatever issue relates to them directly, touches them directly, they're way more likely to do something.
And it's very powerful. I just want to add with the rheumatic heart disease. So it might not move you, but guess who it moves? This movie moves people over 70 who lived with rheumatic heart disease. And so those people we're giving action steps to about how they can sponsor a surgery or whatever, because it does resonate with them. So you have to find the right connection too.
There's an interesting study done by, and this is on a different issue area, but an interesting study done by the Human Rights Campaign on kind of them explaining the shift in popular culture of folks accepting same-sex marriage. And one of the main factors was more people said that they knew someone who was gay. And that's from a mixture of things, folks feeling more comfortable coming out. But when they dove deeper on that question, so I think 8 out of 10 people now say that they know someone who's gay. But when they dove deeper on that question and they say, well, who's the person that you know is gay? Is it a family member, a coworker, a friend? About 20 to 30% of the people who responded named a character on television.
Right.
Like I know Will from Will and Grace.
Absolutely.
Because they feel, because it was a normalized character who comes into their home once a week and they feel like they know them.
Normalize, when you just said normalize, so Ellen came out, Will and Grace, Modern Family. So what's really interesting is modern, and it was really done quite thoughtfully. You might disagree sort of from political perspectives, but it was done quite thoughtfully on Modern Family. Those two guys, they're just like you and I. They just have sex with each other, but they want kids, and they have a house, and they have a pet, and they're just like, you know, everyday people. And that normalized it in a way as opposed to a much more radical activist, you know, approach, which is, you know, I support freedom to marry, but I really want to be still an outsider and whatever. Hollywood doesn't do that. Hollywood does, as you just said, this normalization that I really think that is one topic where Hollywood really did move the needle. It'll be interesting to see, you know, now there's a lot of discussion, will it change gay culture because marriage is legal, et cetera, which is interesting. But Hollywood did normalize it, just like Hollywood, we don't see people smoking on TV shows. We see people buckling their seatbelts because the networks make us do it, and because of Jay's work, we started to see Designated Driver, and it had a huge impact because it normalized behavior in such a way that dramas can do.
When Joe Biden came out on Meet the Press and said that he had evolved in his position on same-sex marriage, David Gregory asked him, like, well, what was the main kind of factor? And he says in the interview, he's like, I think Will and Grace had a bigger change on social culture than anything else. You know,
People said when we interviewed them for our study on human papillomavirus, we also asked them a lot of questions about ER, and they said their second favorite storyline was Clooney and Juliana's Doug Ross and Nurse Hathaway. But their favorite storyline was Jeannie Boulet's journey with HIV and being accepted in the workplace. And now that's really not so much. I mean, you might argue that it's still an issue in places, but it's not like it was in 1998 when we did that show. That was really a contentious issue, and she was a healthcare provider. So that normalized really the way people really identified with her, and it changed the way people thought about people with HIV.
questions? Right here, man. Stand up and wave so they know where you are.
Hi, my name's Nicole. I'm wondering how you decide, there's so many issues to choose, how do you decide which issues to incorporate into storylines or to focus on?
Well, that's the great thing about doing network television when you have 25 episodes to do every year, and I did 239 on SVU. I used to always worry I'd run out, but then there'd be some new issue that would come up, you know, and I would look for things in odd places. Like the journal Neurology had a really interesting piece about a man who was this everyday guy, and he became a pedophile, and it turned out he had a brain tumor, and when they removed the brain tumor, he wasn't anymore. So that got into issues of, is there a place in your brain, and you know, how do we investigate that? So I was always because I just like learning stuff, and I think all people do. So the world was, you know, on our show, not so much as Law and Order was really ripped from the headlines. Ours was more sort of from the back pages and journals, and you know, things that I thought were interesting. How do we make a show that grapples with, you know, bullying? I mean, I could go on and on. So it was just like a great playground for me. I was really lucky to do a show where I could just do anything I wanted back then.
Questions? Right here.
Mark Davis, I'm interested in what stories you've presented that you expected to really resonate that actually fell flat, and what did you learn from them? Insofar as the magic of storytelling, how did it progress you?
For me, it was, we did a show on rape in the military with Mariska about 6 or 7 years ago. We didn't get a blip. And then when Kirby Dick did Invisible War, it was ready. The time was right because people were more ready in the military, maybe because of Don't Ask, Don't Tell going away and all of that there was, now the culture had changed. But when we did it 6 years ago, we pushed, and we just couldn't get any traction. And we were amazed that we couldn't get newspapers, we couldn't do any kind of press on it. It just, there was no interest. It was a woman in the military who was raped, and it just wasn't the time. So that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, it's a great question. I do a fair amount of sort of PSAs for pancreatic cancer, and I'm constantly trying to engage people on that. And one aspect of my film that has had a lot of effect is a small story. My main character, Aaron Swartz, was arrested for downloading 4.2 million academic journal articles from the online service JSTOR. So he has a kind of philosophical opposition to this kind of walling up of the world's research, taxpayer-funded research, behind these paywalls and this kind of ivory tower. And so that's what our film's about. But there's a small story that came out about Jack Andraka, who is a 14-year-old kid, a really kind of brilliant 14-year-old kid, like Aaron was, who had access to JSTOR through some quirk through a university or something. We had free access, didn't have to pay the $40, $50, $60 a pop to get there. So, and what he did was he was experimenting with an early detection test for pancreatic cancer, and he found one. This 14-year-old kid found this solution to this disease. And pancreatic cancer is an awful disease. The 5-year survival rate is less than 5%. And what that community has always wanted is some kind of early detection test. So here comes this kid who has access to this ivory tower that's locking lots of other people out. And because of that, is able to find this critical test that's now really going to save people's lives. So the way telling that through the film has had more resonance than me trying to. I've been working for pancreatic, try to do PSAs for pancreatic cancer for 8 years, and I'm not saying we haven't been effective. We certainly have, but there is some quirk of understanding information and this kind of new wave. It's sort of what you're saying with the Invisible War. There's a readiness for in different ways for a story that can be told in a different way that can be effective.
Okay, we have time for one more question. I always hate this part. The gentleman in the way back waving his hand, standing tall.
Hi, my name is Brian Delaney. I'm a playwright from Ireland, and I'm actually at the Aspen Ideas Festival, curiously enough, to write a piece based on an idea. And I'm here with another playwright, and we've been talking this week about the traps and dangers of that, the danger towards, let's say, statement rather than suggestion, didacticism, telling people things rather than letting people draw their own conclusions. So it seems that there are a lot of fascinating kind of pitfalls for a writer. And I'd just love if you could speak to that for a few moments, please. Do you guys have checklists about how you approach a story to, let's say, have the themes embedded organically in the way the characters are facing their situations?
I tend to lead. I'm sure you've got, but I tend to think about this in terms of actions and events, right? And the actual kind of story of something. I often ask myself, when I'm taking on a project, like, is it a story? I mean, it's really simple. And what does that story mean? What sort of meaning kind of bubbles to the surface when you just hear a series of events? A series of events can be incredibly powerful and evocative and communicate something so directly, and so that you don't have to have the experts necessarily, or you can sort of let that happen, let people understand the meaning of a story, and then take it to the next level when it's obvious what it's about. There is something very powerful about. I'll continue to do like issue-driven documentaries as well and investigative stuff, but certainly as a storyteller, there's something very powerful about just being able to tell a sequence of events that does most of the work for you, and then you can kind of build from that. That's sort of I think an interesting and very powerful and evocative approach.
Again, it's all about the characters, and so we have to know our characters well. So when I did the euthanasia story, Maloney's character is a father of 5, so he had a very different perspective about a child suffering from that of Mariska Hargitay's character, who had no children in the show and had a different point of view, versus Ice-T's character, who thought, who had another perspective, or Richard Belzer's character, who was an Orthodox Jew. So I was able, through their characters, and trying always to be true to their characters and not change them suddenly, that they articulate how they feel, what they think. And that's just what the world is like. You all have different perspectives because you come from different places, and then we come together and we argue it out. As Brian was saying, it's like fun to argue it out, and then we come to maybe some agreement, or maybe we don't, but we turn to the law for a solution, or maybe we don't. Yeah. But that's what's really fun about drama, because it puts it out there in all its messiness.
Well, it's a safe space, right? You can argue, you can have characters with wildly different opinions. I mean, obviously Shakespeare is like this. You know, everybody has a different opinion. They're arguing. It's a place where those debates can be played out in a way in which you're not directly being confronted, and that's great. I mean, you know, as audience can try on different viewpoints. What do I think about that? What do I think about this? There can be a broad space. It's not the only way, you know, to approach it, but it's certainly a wonderful way, kind of safe place to understand lots of different viewpoints.
And I think we're out of time. So Brian Appenberger, Neil Baer, thank you guys, and thank you all for coming.